Well, welcome if you're joining us. This is very exciting. It's an event I'm hoping to continue doing in future years now that we all know how to Zoom. For people that don't know, I'm Sarah Lebner. I'm the principal architect at Lighthouse Architecture and Science, which is a interdisciplinary firm in Canberra. So we're architects and scientists delivering a collaborative approach, and our focus is energy efficient housing. And we're sort of doing some work looking at affordability as well as looking at modular design process to help bring energy efficient housing more into the mainstream. I also wrote a book, 101 Things I Didn't Learn in Architecture School, which has really started off this forum, which we're using to host tonight. It's pretty self-explanatory. Students and graduates can get that one if they want to. And I also run a membership as part of that called the Architect Project, which is a place for students and graduates to come together and to help achieve employment, career progression or registration sooner with more confidence and more impact. I was the recipient of the 2020 National Emerging Architect Prize as run by the Australian Institute of Architects. And we're here tonight having a chat with all of the state winners. So due to COVID and having a newborn, I did the normal national tour virtually. Which was a bit of a bummer because I didn't really get to chat properly to each of the state winners. So I was keen to have this forum so that we could chat, but also so we get a chance to meet each other, because these guys haven't really had a chance to meet each other. Now, obviously our guests today are joining us from right across Australia. So let me switch into gallery view so you can see our lovely guests. And of course, we've got people tuning in today from all across Australia. So I do want to speak a little bit about how as architects, we do play a heavy role culturally and physically interacting with the sites that our projects reside in all across our wonderful continent. So I want to acknowledge the thousands of years of intimate knowledge and relationships that traditional owners carry with these sites, and their rich continuing contributions that they make when we open ourselves to that collaboration as architects. And for that, I pay my respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging, particularly those residing from country that our guests are practicing in today. So a warm welcome to any Indigenous Australians watching tonight, alongside non-Indigenous Australians and international viewers that are tuning in here or abroad. Tonight's not just about those of us on the screen, and I will stop talking in a minute, but it's also about those of you who are joining us live. And you can do so now, hopefully, by saying hello in the chat. So I'm watching that on my other screen. So if you are watching, please pop a hello in the chat. Let us know where you're watching from and where you're up to in your career. It's nice to know whether we've got students or graduates or practicing architects watching. I'm going to start tonight by introducing you to each of our guests. And we do have one more joining us late, possibly even another one because someone's missing in action, all nice and casual. So we'll see. Some more people might pop in later. So we're going to meet the state winners. These are people recognised as outstanding emerging architects across Australia. I'm going to introduce each one of them by reading out their jury citation, and then we'll ask them a few questions before we get into the discussion. So firstly, I'm going to introduce Ellen. If you can give us a little wave. Ellen Buttrose is from People Oriented Design in Queensland. As an emerging architect, Ellen has already executed some of the nation's highest performing and most innovative sustainable projects amidst challenging extreme climatic conditions, remote delivery, and intercultural engagement. Ellen brings a local lens to global issues, including climate change, Indigenous empowerment, and housing affordability. And the jury was inspired by Ellen's energy, ethics, and competence. The 2020 Queensland Emerging Architect Prize was awarded to Ellen in recognition of her unique accomplishments across all facets of practice, research, and education, and to provide a platform for the kind of leader the profession desires in its next generation of architects. Hi, Ellen. I just wanted to ask you quickly before we move on, what area your research had focused on?
My research. So I guess I'm not kind of a formal researcher. I'm pretty practice focused, but I think I'm really interested in how we bring sustainability and how we bring cultural diversity to how we practice every day. So I try and kind of embed that in all that we do. And we work, because we're in Cairns, we're in far north Queensland, so far north. We really, I try to connect voices from remote places we work to urban environments as well. So we're kind of living in a more polarized society. It's nice to be able to bring that back together and kind of understand a lot of different perspectives. I feel like we've got a lot to learn. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Thanks, Ellen. Next, I'm going to introduce Matthias Hollenstein, or Matt, from Studio Hollenstein in New South Wales. So Matt was the recipient in New South Wales in recognition for his significant contribution to the architectural profession and the advancement of architecture within the public domain. His practice, Studio Hollenstein, is already the recipient of extensive recognition and accolades through architecture awards. However, Matt should also be commended for his personal commitment to urban design, education, practice, and design excellence. In a very short period, Matt has broken down traditional barriers for young emerging architects locally, nationally, and globally, and redefined the role of relevance of a younger generation of architects. Matt, one of the awesome opportunities or achievements you had really early in your career that's helped get things going was the Green Square competition. Could you tell us briefly about that?
Yeah, Green Square Library and Plaza was a project that came out of a design competition run by the City of Sydney in 2012. It was an open and anonymous competition. It was 2 stages and it had a very light kind of sort of set of entry requirements. And that really, I guess, winning that competition really allowed us to sort of put our ideas forward and to see those ideas realized, and then kind of see what came from that. And I think the City of Sydney Council were very strategic in making those entry requirements quite light on, and that really made it accessible to young, old, or any level of professional, and had really good results for us, at least. Yeah. Fantastic.
Awesome. Yeah, what an incredible opportunity to start a career. Thanks, Matt. Next, we're going to jump to Pippa Jensen. If you can give us a wave, Pippa. Pippa works at Cumulus Studio in Tasmania. And Pippa was awarded the prize as an educator, advocator, and collaborator. Having quickly established herself as approachable and tenacious practitioner, Pippa has also been extremely active in taking the profession to the wider public, and particularly in raising the awareness of and recognition of the tremendous contribution of women to the culture and practice of architecture. Her leadership in establishing the statewide representation of the Finley project is particularly noted. Pippa is both inspiring and generous, qualities which manifest in her architectural work and speak to a highly considered and promising professional career. Welcome, Pippa. Could you tell us what the Finley project is?
So the Finley project is a Tasmanian sort of group that was instigated out of the Institute of Architects, but it was really about bringing together women and supporting each other. It had been operating in the South for a couple of years prior, and Sophie Bentz, one of the founders of the Southern group, and I did a parlour salon in Launceston. And then from that, I and some other female friends in the industry started the Northern chapter. So, yeah, we've been going to December 2019, and we've had a few significant events since, and it's been really great.
Well done. Great work. Thanks, Pippa. Next, I'm going to introduce Erin Crowden. Erin works at Williams Burton Leopardi, I hope I've said that right, Erin, and is also the National Imagine President. Erin was recognised for her unique commitment to the Institute, student engagement, and also broader community contributions over many years, commencing soon after graduation and continuing to this day. Erin was congratulated and recognised for leadership through the Institute at a local and national level, the Emerging Architects Graduate Network, SONA, the Adelaide City Prize, and WDAC, which I don't know what that is, you'll have to tell us, Erin, while also providing key practice roles on multiple award-winning projects. Erin, you've played an incredible leadership role for our student and graduates in the industry. What have been some of the key agendas that you've been pushing during that time, and what do we still need to work on? And what does WDAC stand for?
So I'll start with that one. That was a typo. It's white. It's actually WIDAC, so Women in Design and Construction.
Okay.
Yes, that we'll put that one to one side as a typo that never managed to get corrected. Yeah, so obviously, excuse me, I've been in the role of Imagine President for last year and this year. And before that, I've been the Imagine SA co-chair for 3 years before that, and was heavily involved in what Imagine was in South Australia before it was Imagine, and sort of brought it into becoming Imagine in South Australia. And before that, I was heavily involved in Institute events and everything. So I feel like the Institute's played a very strong part in my career to date, right from student times. In terms of what I've been advocating for, gender equity has been obviously a big push. In more recent years, I'm really trying to push for, and work-life balance is a very general term, but especially visibility and acceptance of working mothers and young working mothers. And Sarah, I know that you're sort of definitely in this realm and on board with this. And making the profession more aware and more open to the flexibility that's required and the changes that are required in order to keep women in the profession and to keep registration of females strong and growing. So they're my personal things. From an Imagine point of view, sustainability is also a massive thing that we're pushing for nationally and state level. General advocacy, inclusion, diversity, all of the big things that are big for all of our demographic really, and for the future of architecture and communities generally. So it's a very broad scope, and trying to narrow it down and single things out is becoming more and more difficult as I go on.
Absolutely. And thanks for the work you're doing in that space. And it's wonderful that you've been recognised in the format of this award. I'm going to move on to Sandy. Now, Sandy, I didn't get a chance to check if I'm saying your surname right. Sandy Angie, is that right? Angie. Well, it was a two-way bet. I got it wrong.
Thank you.
Sandy's joining us from Perth, and Sandy was recognised because of her leadership and contribution to the promotion of architecture within the community. Sandy's recognised as being instrumental in the establishment of the Historic Heart Project, seen as a catalyst for the revitalisation of the east end of Perth. Her leadership and contribution to the project is commendable and has helped promote meaningful community engagement with heritage architecture and its value. I also wanted to mention that Sandy is the editor of The Architect magazine and has a regular column in the West Australian newspaper called Meet the Architect. And now, Sandy, another fact that I only learnt about you today is that you are the Deputy Lord Mayor of the City of Perth. That sounds very impressive. Tell us about that.
So that actually, I guess the decision to run for council last year was inspired by my work on the Historic Heart Project that you mentioned. So the Historic Heart Project, as you said, was about revitalising the east end of the city, and the east end of Perth was kind of this forgotten neighbourhood in our city, but had our greatest collection of heritage buildings. So one of the things that we did with the Historic Heart Project was basically catalogue all of those amazing heritage buildings and create a free app to help people explore the area. Then we did a number of public art projects, so large-scale public murals, lighting installations in laneways and landscaping to really just help draw attention to the area. And social aspects were also really important in that project, because we're at the moment in the city of Perth, as many cities across Australia and across the world, the issues of people experiencing homelessness is obviously something that we're tackling at the city of Perth. And so, we were keen to engage with social organisations. So with the landscaping project, we engaged a group called Green World Revolution, which employed people experiencing long-term unemployment to look after our landscaping. We also engaged artists from an art group at an organisation called RUA, which helps people experiencing homelessness. So, we did, with limited resources on the project, we kind of did what we could to help highlight social issues and the area. And I guess with everything that I learned about the city through that project, and also at that time we were suffering from a bit of dysfunction at the city of Perth, which has inspired me to run for council, and I ultimately ended up with the role of Deputy Lord Mayor.
That's awesome. And I love that it's called Deputy Lord Mayor. I think that's very exciting. I'm sure we're going to talk about this more later, because one of the themes we're going to touch on tonight is architects and politics. So I'm looking forward to that discussion. Thank you and welcome, Sandy. Now, I want to acknowledge that there was also a Victorian winner, Tom Mckenzie. He was meant to be joining us tonight, so he might pop in later. But I wanted to note that he was the winner down there. Ironically, my question for him was going to be how he balanced such heavy institute involvement, university education and research, and running his own practice. So maybe he's not here because he's just busy doing too many wonderful things. There was no Northern Territory winner last year, so we haven't left them out. No one was awarded the award last year. So I noticed we've got a few people tuning in from all around. We've got graduates from Queensland, another Brisbane representation, Hawkesbury. We've got a grad from Newcastle, South Australia, and a special shout out to Theo, who's moving to Tassie from Russia in a couple of months. So that's very exciting. I hope you get through all the quarantining, Theo. That sounds intense. We're going to start off our discussion tonight by just doing another little summary and opportunity for each of you to get to know our guests here tonight. And that's by asking them how they explain what they do or what their firm does to a first-year student, to make sure that all the students and graduates watching can really understand the work of these emerging architects. I know when I was a student and even a graduate, and I'm reminded by this with the members from the Architect Project, it can be just such a foreign industry. Some of the terms and what we're doing might not make a lot of sense. So we're going to reiterate that for everyone. And I'm going to randomly pick some people. Pippa, we might start with you. How do you explain what you do to a first year student?
Oh no, I was worried you were going to ask me first.
Just wing it. It's all casual.
Like Sarah mentioned, I work at Cumulus Studio, and we're a very ideas-driven studio, but we also pride ourselves on collaboration. So I guess I'm starting with that because in any project, it starts with collaboration, and not just within the studio, within team, like studio teams, that's with clients, with engineers, landscape architects, builders and contractors. So that's kind of our ethos. But then funnily, I was at a leadership course yesterday, and our one of our tasks was to write a motto, which sounds really corny, but mine was about inspiring creativity and optimism in everything I do, which sounds really ridiculous. I like it very
not at all.
But I guess in project work or in those collaborations, I like to think that I bring that optimism and creative thinking. Yeah.
That's awesome. I think as much optimism as we can get in architecture is perfect. Thanks, Pippa. Matthias, I might jump to you. How do you explain what you do to a first year student?
Yeah, I mean, it is an interesting question. What's the answer for a first year student than, sort of anyone else? But I have a practice in Sydney. We're lucky enough to work across a really broad range of project types and project scales. As was mentioned earlier by Sarah, one of our projects is Green Square Library. We've also worked on, or in the midst of working on, a master plan for the state government for the Western Sydney Parkland City. We've worked on shops, worked on school projects, so a really kind of broad range. And I think that it's that diversity of project type and scale that we love. And I think we just enjoy the challenge or kind of opportunity of having fresh eyes on a project type. And for us, that brings that kind of creativity and that joy, rather than always sort of working on the same thing. And our project, we're kind of a values-driven office, and we're really interested in how a project can be structured to benefit society the most. How can it enable or catalyze culture, community, commerce in a way that allows society to transform for the better? And yeah, for us, architecture isn't about the style, it's about the values that you bring to it, and they kind of define the outcome.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, I think it's really clear from your work, the thought you guys put into how it interacts and contributes to the city and changes the experience or opportunities that people are having for them. So that's a great summary. Thanks, Matt. Ellen, let's jump to you. How do you explain what you do to a first year student?
I think it's really interesting jumping off the back of what Matt was saying, because I'd probably say that we try to do similar things, but often working in regional and remote settings, you add this element of putting in a location that's pretty far away from where you are. So we're in Cairns, but we work across the Torres Strait, we work out to the Western Gulf, and then like right down to Brisbane as well. So often we're working in a place that's not our own, with a climate that's not our own, but also a culture that's not our own as well. So I'm often working with people where we're trying to make a building that fits, that isn't about what we want necessarily, but it's about, advocating for people who want to, for a building that doesn't necessarily need to have a cultural overlay, but needs to be designed in a way that's more appropriate for the place that it is. So I feel like it goes back to what people were saying about collaboration as well. It's about a collaborative process it's based in listening, rather than trying to and almost being so aware of what lens you bring to a project. And that almost comes with climate too, I think. Climate and sustainability, it's really about kind of understanding a place and designing something that's so of its place. So that involves a deep listening too of where you are. So if you're building something that's on an island in the Torres Strait, it's going to be very different to building something in the West. So it's like, I feel like it's almost coming with open eyes, open ears, and trying to deep listen. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what really struck me when I did the tour presentation with you, Ellen, compared to particularly the rest of us, is exactly what you've said. The breadth of what you guys do, both geographically in terms of different climate and different cultures, is amazing. Particularly when you showed a little map, I think showing that Port Moresby is actually the closest capital to you guys.
Yeah.
Really puts things in perspective.
Totally. And that Melbourne is closer to Brisbane than we are, and we're in the same state.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah. It's amazing. Thanks for that, Ellen. Now we've just had Tom pop in. We were making jokes about how busy you are, Tom, behind your back. I'm not sure if you can hear us.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Tom. I'm just going to do your introduction now that you're here, Tom. That's okay.
Sorry, I'm late.
That's absolutely fine. I'm going to read out your citation, Tom, just so that people know who you are. So Tom is obviously the Victorian finalist and is from his own firm, Mckenzie. The citation reads that Tom is perfectly balanced architect who continues to advance architecture through his practice, teaching and research. Establishing Winwood Mckenzie in 2011 after working for some notable local and international practices, Tom produces architecture that contributes to the cultural landscape of Australia. A series of sensitive alterations and additions strongly underpins an office built from the ground up. As an architect's portfolio grows, the method around brief, context, history, and place is tested. Tom's beautifully resolved projects hold the practice's future in excellent stead. Tom has managed to combine this with an intense contribution to the Institute and teaching. Currently at the Institute, Tom is an international chapter counsellor and has held a host of other leadership roles within the Institute and for Imagine and Sona throughout his career. He co-produced the Hearing Architecture podcast in 2019 and is in high demand for teaching across Victoria's universities. That sounds like an awful lot, Tom. How do you balance institute involvement, university education, research, and running your own practice?
Oh, that's a difficult question to ask straight off the bat. It is a lot, but I think the thing is that they all feed into one another. And that's what makes it possible to actually engage with a lot of these cultural ideas. And that I think the questions that you sent us were a lot of them. The answers are a lot of them are framed around how it's a collective effort. And I think that as a practice from which was a very small practice for the first 5 years, myself and maybe a couple of other people, it made a lot of sense to be engaged with a broader conversation through both the Institute and universities. Yep. And then now, as the practice grows, the focus moves towards more focusing on the practice and less focusing on those other roles, simply because of the demands of time. And as many of you would be aware of, having a young family, that the demands are constantly shifting. So I think it seems like a lot, and it was a lot, but at the same time, it was also a very important way of engaging with the profession and with architecture beyond the limitations of small practice. And I think I got more out of it. Yeah,
I think it's really clear from your practice and the work that you do that it's clearly benefited heavily from all the sort of extra things that you're taking on in the sort of intricacies and sensibilities. We'll just get back to, we were just running through how you explain what you do to a first year student, and we've had some great summaries and introductions. We might jump to Sandy now. Sandy, how do you explain what you do to a first year student?
Thanks, Sarah. I guess at the moment I've got a portfolio of jobs. So I've got my own residential architecture practice, chapter counsellor of the Institute in WA, editor of the Institute's magazine, which is called The Architect, and Deputy Lord Mayor, which you mentioned before. But it's interesting that Tom said that the roles all feed into each other and overlap, and that's what I feel as well in that all the things that I do are about, encouraging better design and outcomes for the community. So with my resi practice, I'm an old emerging architect. I studied architecture mature age. I was a lawyer for nearly 10 years before I studied architecture. So when I finished my degree, I worked for some larger practices, but quickly worked out that in larger practices, I guess, as you progress through the ranks, you might end up more managing people and managing the practice, whereas what I wanted to do was the design element. I studied, as I said, mature age, and that's why I decided to set up my own residential practice where I just really enjoy designing homes or renovations for people. And then, in my role of the Institute and editor and Deputy Lord Mayor, I guess that uses the skills that I learnt in my previous career. And I quickly worked out that, I found a role for myself in promoting architecture, starting with the column I wrote for a number of years, and I've run out of time to do that after I've taken on all these other things. And I really enjoy that aspect of the work that I do, in that, I think architects quite often undersell the value that they contribute to community, across the community in so many different ways. And, I just enjoy getting out there and being editor of the magazine and promoting all the beautiful work that West Australian architects do, and valuable work as well.
I think it's really awesome to see the work that you're doing to open up the edges of the profession with the broader community and the industry. You know, a lot of the work that we do to promote architecture and what we can do is often within the realms of architecture, but the fact that you're taking on those extra sort of roles, pushing in the media and into politics, is really exciting and great for students and graduates to see tonight. So thanks, Sandy. Erin, how
Thanks,
do you
explain? I just want to quickly, say that, just saying that, the architecture degree, it just shows that it can lead to all different careers. It's such a good grounding to do many different things.
Yeah, thanks, Sandy. That's a absolutely valuable point. And yeah, I think people show time and time again, if you're just following your interests and your strengths, you can really turn it into a lot of things. Erin, how do you explain what you do to a first year student?
All right, so I'm a bit of a combination of what everyone said so far, I guess. I work for Williams Burton Lea Party, and through that role, we focus on really highly bespoke and handcrafted homes for people, but also smaller projects. So we do a little bit of hospitality and some sort of some office fit outs and commercial things like that. But we focus really on the person-to-person connection and the relationship that we build both with the client, but also with our trades and with craftspeople. We've created some really amazing ranges of lighting and things, working through local craftspeople to further sort of layer our projects. I guess the studio motto is live life well, and we try to, it's very broad again, but we try to bring that little aspect of joy and celebration into every part of people's daily lives. And that was really paramount last year in particular, when everyone was suddenly spending a lot more time at home. It was really nice to know that you've had a positive impact on their environment that they're now having to spend so much time in. So I think that's probably a quick summary.
That's really nice. I love that Pippa and Erin both have mottos now. Sounds like a nice thing to come back to sort of center yourself and remind yourself why you're doing what you're doing. Tom, we'll round up with you. How do you explain what you do to a first year student?
I taught first year for 4 years at Monash Uni, and I think a lot of the time was more about explaining what the role of architects can be and how that can be quite a broad thing, I think, as evidenced by this group here. And but in terms of how I describe our practice, it's and also my role as an architect is as a design-focused practice, and with a particular focus on heritage renovations increasingly. And I think by acknowledging that we're a design-focused practice, that sort of shapes the relationships with clients and projects, and also the way we engage with architecture as a discourse and as an idea of architecture, that it's also about ideas. And I think increasingly for us, those ideas are starting to engage with quite big ideas within society, whether that be addressing climate change and sustainability, material resources, how you deal with the built heritage, how you create engaging public spaces or civic spaces that sort of foster community. And all of these ideas are all wrapped up into what the role of architecture in our practice is. And through that, I think to do that well, there has to be a degree of excellence that you are aspiring to, and that's can be challenging, but I think at the end of a project always seems to be very worthwhile, that the effort, the results of the project and the duration of how long that project is going to exist is a very rewarding thing. I think you're on mute, Sarah.
I am on mute. There's a toddler crying in the room next door. I'm glad you finished on that, because I was just thinking about one of the questions we have coming up later on is about time and architecture. So we'll hold on to that for later. I guess I should briefly answer the question too. How do I explain what I do to a first year student? I guess there's two facets. Our practice, Lighthouse Architecture and Science, with architects and scientists. I guess we really take a data and science driven approach to really understanding the residential construction industry, how it operates, how things are currently done, how costings actually work. And then we apply the scientific knowledge with thermal simulation, as well as testing built projects and tracking the data of how they're performing, as well as research from other areas, in order to create energy efficient homes in the most cost-effective way that we can, but also overlaying all of that critical architecture thinking and design thinking that we're doing as well. And then in my work with my first architecture job and the architecture project, first year students might not really understand that there's a process of learning and becoming an architect that goes beyond your graduation from your 5th year of study or master's. So while university studies are often heavily focused on that design thinking, context, history, cultural understandings, critical thinking, problem solving, they're all the skills you're honing at university. A lot of the learning that you do is actually done or continues after you graduate on the job, and that's a lot of the technical and construction knowledge, local planning knowledge, building contracts, things like that. And it's actually a really a good way to learn it in some senses, because you'll be learning it in the industry that you're working in, whether it's residential or commercial or public, as well as the location you're in. It varies state to state, but also being in Australia, we have really different climates that you need to consider. So you continue that learning before you then you keep a logbook, and then you go for your registration process. So what I do with my first architecture job and the architecture project is help people supplement their learning through that stage, so that they're exposed to more than just what they're seeing and experiencing in the one firm and climate and location that they might be working in. Okay, I think that was a really good and fun introduction to all of you guys and what each of us are doing. So we're going to jump into some questions, and I am taking note of the couple of questions that have come in through the chat. We will work them through. So we've got 3 main questions tonight that we're going to look at, and these came from members of the architecture project. And we might start with the sustainability one, because that's a sort of softer one to lead us into potentially. So the question is, how does your work or practice approach sustainability and respond to climate change? So I think we might start with you, Ellen, because we did talk about how you are dealing with such different climates and different cultural areas and different communities, certainly very different to the work that I'm doing in a very cool temperate climate. So how does your firm approach sustainability, Ellen?
Yeah, great question. I think it's so central to what we do, as I think it is for a lot of architects. I feel like it's really becoming such a through line to how a lot of architects practice. I think it differs perhaps in the place you are and the space that how you execute it. So when I was in Melbourne, it was very different to how I practice now in Cairns. It's interesting. I feel like I'm constantly trying to listen to the conversations that are happening on a local or a regional level. So we've got a university up here who's been talking about and the kind of the conversations that have been happening about the incredible amount of seawalls that are being built up north, the fact that the Torres Strait is actually literally sinking and will be part of the first series of islands that will go. And so it feels like it's really lapping at our doorstep up this way. And I feel like the way that we try and practice is to build things that are going to be resilient, responsive to the environment we live in, and really try to become exemplars of how we can build in the future. So there is a smaller pool of architects up here. You know, we're not swimming in enormous amounts of design talent. There's incredible designers up here, definitely, but a lot of the buildings that are built up here, there's a really strong donga culture, which is essentially you roll up and put something in a place. So we're really trying to our focus is to build exemplars for sustainability. So just recently we completed a land and sea ranger station on Thursday Island in the Torres Strait, which is, along with our client who's incredibly forward thinking as land and sea rangers, they wanted an exemplar too. So it's now going to be the first neighbours rated building in the Torres Strait, and it's designed to have all these incredible visual indicators about how the building's functioning, so that people can go and learn how a building functions as well. So wow. It's like both doing its thing, but then it's also designed to educate as it keeps working. So it's really about both how we design, but then how that then gets used as a tool in future as well.
And there's an incredible TED talk by your director, Shanine Fanton, called The Least House Necessary, which I think is a great one for students and graduates to check out if they're interested in this. Could you tell us briefly about the idea of the least house necessary?
Yeah, totally. And we apply this principle to almost every project we do, which is essentially looking at the footprint of how we build. And, you know, this applies to residential, but also to commercial and cultural projects as well. It's looking at it. It's what program can we overlap and how minimally can we build have a built footprint. So in this project that I was just talking about, a lot of the meeting room spaces ended up actually being outdoors. So that's also another advantage of the tropics, is you can start to tip a lot of program outside. Not so great in the dead of winter down south in Tassie at the moment, but it's something that we really try and look at the minimal kind of footprint of what something can be and how we can overlap program to really work it as hard as it can be and be conscious about every square meter in a building.
Yeah. That's a philosophy that my firm certainly shares with yours. And we did run a joint workshop down in Canberra, which was very fun. Yeah. I'm going to throw it open to the floor now. If you guys give me a nod or a wink or something, if you want to contribute to that question about sustainability. And there's always a little awkward moment. I'll go. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think Ellen kind of hit it on the nail head when she said, you know, each site, each project, each client is kind of different, and you have to kind of tailor your approach, you know, to those sort of needs or those requirements or opportunities. And for us, we, you know, just to give an example, like not every project can get a NABERS rating or a 5-star rating. It costs a lot of money and a lot of consultant expertise to get those ratings. You know, it's maybe like 200 grand to get a 5-star rating building, regardless of the building.
For NABERS, yeah. I'm just going to pop that in because there's different rating schemes and different stars are good and bad.
Totally. And to, you know, say we did a renovation for the Powerhouse Museum Research Library in Sydney. It's a museum that is eventually going to move or relocate into different places. And they wanted to just upgrade their library. The lifespan of the project was maybe 4 or 5 years. So rather than do a full fit out where everything was sort of built in and effectively, you know, aborted in 5 years, we sort of pitched to them and probably won the project on it. But the idea that like the fit out would be mobile. So rather than, you know, inbuilt, everything was sort of these large pods that could relocate with them. And, you know, that was sort of as sustainable as we could get it. We didn't bother with a rating, with a, you know, a tick box. It was really just about the fundamentals of the project and responding to, I guess, their challenges. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you know, Green Square Library is a 6-star rated library project. It feeds into sustainable town infrastructure, you know, a recycled water network, but that required, you know, sustainability approach at the city scale, or for that whole precinct. And there are certain costs involved in that. So I think there's a real range, and you just have to tailor it to what's in front of you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's part of our role as architects. And you sort of touched on star ratings, and there's sort of all these various rating systems depending on whether it's residential or commercial, or you're in New South Wales or other states. But I think my message to that question is one, that there are great tools that we can use, data, technology, simulation, there's excellent research, we can test things. But then number two is that remember that those things are tools, and we have to be really intelligent and holistic in our architectural thinking as to how we apply and use those. So it's always that sort of two-pronged approach. Sandy, what did you want to add?
Yeah, I just want to add that, in addition to obviously passive design and looking at neighbours ratings and all of those tools, I mean, good design itself is sustainable, because it means it won't be knocked down. In one of my recent interviews for The Architect magazine, one of the architects I interviewed said that he met a builder who said he could make a business out of knocking over bad 1990s renos. So that's simply not sustainable if you're going to knock something down in 10, 20, 30 years. So, this adaptive reuse, respecting heritage and respecting architecture from every generation, and and seeing what we can do to adapt rather than bulldoze. And actually, another architect I interviewed, it's one of the great things about the magazine, speaking to all these really interesting people, is said that the current Pritzker Prize winners, that location in Basel, are experts at this, and they've got a policy of never demolishing a building. And I think that's a great philosophy.
Wow.
And if we aim if we aim to design well and design for the long term, then that's the most sustainable thing we can do.
Yeah, awesome point to add. Thanks, Sandy. Does anyone else want to add on to that before we move on to our next question? I think we're good. I think we covered that one quite well. Into a bit of a meatier one here. Will there ever be a time when architecture is one of the forefront aspects in policy making? And as an emerging architect, what steps are you taking to influence policy or get your voice heard? Who wants to kick off with that one? No pressure at all.
I can have a go at that one. I think one thing that I've, because I think it follows on from what I was saying before, and involvement in the institute. So I was on the Victorian Chapter Council, and then National Council when I was Imagine President, and I'm now on the International Chapter Council. And I think all of those are very important mechanisms to have a collective voice of architecture to then influence policy. And I think the Institute as a peak body is well placed to influence policy at a government level, and that is a very long and complicated process. And part of it is, what you realise is that part of it is incremental changes, that there's not one quick fix to all the issues that we would like to address, but that it is a long process of everyone coming along and then forming some sort of consensus about what the right way to deal with the built environment is. And so that's been really inspiring. And then part of the reason why I was keen to get involved in the international chapter is I think that there's elements of that which are global issues and are going to require sort of knowledge sharing and understanding how different government policies are shaping the conversation around the built environment. And then I think it also starts from how we practice and our own practice. So we use 100% green power in our studio, and we're looking towards being a carbon neutral practice. And I think it sets a good example of how we think we should operate as professionals in the world.
Yeah, lead by doing. Thanks, Tom. Does anyone else want to tackle that question? Matt, go for it.
I was just going to say, I mean, I agree with Tom's point of view, and I think a multi-pronged approach is a good idea. But I would say that I feel like the best way to engage in policy is through great architecture, by doing great work. I think great buildings or great urban design projects, they highlight the benefits of good design and good design thinking. And we're in an era where we are literally designing the planet. Like, every project impacts the earth. That's why we're talking about sustainability. And the impacts of our development in changing natural systems means that every micro decision is impacting kind of macro systems. And so I just feel like good work will creates the audience to then look at what the benefits of good design are. As Sandy said as well, an architecture degree does give you so many skills to go into so many avenues. And if you go into policy, then that's fine. But at the end of the day, the best way to kind of tell everyone what architecture is and what its benefits are is through great architecture.
And I think, Matt, you're probably working on some of the bigger projects out of all of us. Have you found a lot of opportunity in those ones to engage in a very immediate level in sort of shaping policy in those? I'm thinking of Green Square as a precinct and what's happening there.
Yeah, I think that sometimes a project can find the right policy. So you find that, if you're kind of trying to navigate a project through, some hurdles or something to achieve, kind of what you want it to do, you can find policies that validate that approach. And that can be used to, kind of convince stakeholders or convince government. And in New South Wales, at least, and I know each sort of state or territory has, government architect or the like. In New South Wales, the Government Architect's Office are putting out a whole series of policies on kind of greener and better places. And these are the kinds of policies that, at least in this sort of immediate period, we sort of look to convince clients of the benefits of design, kind of certain design decisions or approaches.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Ellen, were you going to add something in there?
I was going to speak to perhaps the things that run alongside policy as well, like what's happening with a new normal and in Victoria at the moment, and the power of things like Nightingale, and they're very big things that are kind of getting a national lens at the moment, that are almost, in a sense, saying policy making's being too slow. We're going to kind of bulldoze and see if we can change the discussion ourselves and try and show how we can do it to get investors to get going, to then get governments to kind of come on board too. And I think architects have a real power in that place too, to be visualizers of change and how we can push that. I think there's a real strength in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to note a comment from Luca, who's just completed a research unit into houses in fire-prone areas, and made the point that architects and architecture is certainly at the forefront of policy in that area, which is another good example. Sandy, as the Deputy Lord Mayor of Perth, do you have comments on this sort of coming from the other side?
Yes, I think policy is really important and interesting. I put up, it's called a notice of motion at the City of Perth, where generally what happens at our meetings is the administration puts up matters for the council to decide on, but as elected members we can put up our own notices of motion or ideas for the council to vote on. At the last meeting I put up that the city establishes an architecture and design advisory group to help guide the City of Perth in the design of significant projects to achieve better design outcomes, because obviously we have design review panels and things like that at the city, and it's often very planning based. And I think a lot of people don't understand the difference. There's a huge difference in the disciplines between planning and architecture and design. And to get better design outcomes, I think I think the comments made were exactly right. Great architecture is the best way to sell good design, but for some projects. I think we kind of need the policies in place to push that and promote it, because, in the end, particularly in a city, design is all around us. It's all built environment, and if we want the city to be the best place to live, work and visit, then we need a great design outcomes in our built environment, and great policy to help us get there.
Awesome. Thanks for that insight, Sandy. We might jump on to the next topic unless there's any other burning comments on that one, which is, what role does time play in your work? How do you approach designing for a whole lifetime of a project? And what do you do to consider that lifetime? What do you consider that lifetime to be? Erin, I wonder if you've got any thoughts on this one. Adelaide has some beautiful heritage from my memory of being down there. So what do you do in your work to consider that, but also consider how your projects move forward in time?
Yeah, that's a great question. And first I have to start off by apologising for dropping out before, and also for my camera bouncing around as my dog climbs all over me on the bed.
We can hear you quite well, if that's any consolation.
Good. Yes, I've swapped to the old-fashioned connected headphones now. Yeah, so I guess we're in a really good place in terms of the firm that I work with. A lot of our work is with older heritage homes, and South Australia has a really good stock of older stone and brick houses, which are sort of suited to our climate. But the thing about them was that they were built they were really well built, except for lack of foundations, and the vast majority of them have remained and are still in some form of original condition for the most part. So a lot of the work I do is with them. Those ones are particularly highly valued by our clients, which is great. But then also it's helping clients see the value in other houses and other styles of housing, particularly ones that were built around the 60s and 70s. In Adelaide, the housing stock from that era was not perhaps quite as well built, but still has a lot of value in it. So rather than a client coming to us and saying, look, we've got a great block, but we don't want the house on it, we can work with them, as everyone else has said with things, to alter that house and to change it to become what they want it to be without knocking it down. So our idea is that what we build onto places, when we build onto them, is designed to bring a new life to the project, and that life is designed to be for at least as long as the original house has been there, if not longer. So, I wouldn't expect any of the work that I do or that I'm involved in to be dismantled in any near future. I would hope that it would last for a long time, and that's another reason why we design with quality and why we collaborate so closely with our tradespeople and our clients and the craftspeople who can create all of these unique things that bring this building together and give it a real heart and a real soul, so that it will have value once whichever finishes we have sort of go out of fashion or whatever else. It is about timeless design, that sort of elusive thing that a lot of people are after.
Sorry, I'm muted again. Thanks, Erin. Pippa, I'm wondering if you have anything to add on this one.
Yeah, I think it's actually quite similar to the other two questions in a way. By that I mean at Cumulus, our projects that we kind of are quite focused on are in tourism and in social housing particularly. We do some other types of work like residential and things, but I think within the tourism sector in Tasmania and within social housing, we can make meaningful change in terms of sustainability and in terms of designing for longevity, flexibility, energy efficiency, and they're ways that they're buildings that the general public are kind of in contact with or have accessibility to. So they can kind of lead by example by being buildings that can be experienced by the general public and that type of thing, and make an impact on their life in a way in the current kind of climate. in Tasmania. It's really important to us. Yeah.
And Pippa, I wanted to follow on because there was a question earlier when you were talking right at the start about your firm, asking about collaboration. So what exactly do you mean when you're talking about collaboration with consultants and clients? What does that really look like for you and your practice in a day-to-day setting?
Sure. So it depends on the project, definitely. In residential projects, it's like exceptionally one-on-one and hearing from the client about the way, which I'm sure is the way a lot of architects work. But spending time on site with the client at the particular project, hearing about the way they want to live or work in the space, or they want the visitor experience to be. Yeah, I think it's really engaging with what the experiential qualities of the building will be, and what the client foresees for that, and how we can kind of guide them to think creatively about that, and to sometimes maybe question exactly what their brief might be in terms of sustainability, touching on what Ellen had said about pushing things outside where we can. We, even in Tassie, we definitely still do that. Like, we question, do you actually need a room to put your cars in? Like, do you actually, need so much indoor space? How can your garden give you some of those qualities? And still in Tassie, you can spend time outside, even in the middle of winter and that type of thing. So, yeah.
Sorry, Pippa, I'm just going to jump in because Sandy's leaving. Oh, she's gone already. Sandy did have to leave early, so she has been saying goodbye to us.
Sure.
Thanks, Sandy, for joining. Thanks, Pippa. Sorry, did you want to just finish that?
I think I'm getting off topic about collaboration, but I think it's just listening and talking with people, hearing from builders, about construction drawings or decisions on site, and really talking through the options and then the best way to come up with a solution. It doesn't necessarily have to be the detail that you've drawn or, your first idea. You can be flexible and, resolve the best outcome, which, yeah.
I think sometimes when we're collaborating with consultants, we often forget to say or talk about the most obvious thing, which is just sharing the common goals for the project. I think it's easy to sort of just jump straight into, well, I thought it would be this slab system, or how's this water network going to work? But it's nice to take a step back and make sure that everyone's on the same page in terms of the goals, and that you are just really a team working together and try to each apply your own specialist knowledge to reach the best outcome depending on the goals of the project. Did anyone else have anything to add on time? Tom, I'm not sure if you wanted to talk about time.
I just had one thing that's related to how we design, and that's that often we try to design a loose fit for a few of the rooms, particularly for residential projects, but also for commercial projects, that they can be adapted to different family configurations or different uses without having to be at worst demolished, or at second best sort of significantly renovated. And I think that I would hope that means that people can live in the houses for multiple stages through their lives, and then that would then form an attachment to that residence and the memories, obviously, in a residential setting, and that would then lead to preservation of that built form over time. And that, I think, has been really important for a number of projects. And the other thing about time is trying to understand how the project is the task of designing and realizing a work of architecture is part of the experience of living, and it's not sort of the goal is that all of a sudden there'll be the finished project, but really to get people, like what you were saying about shared goals, but to really see the project as part of the experience and bring everyone along on that. And so it's not this mad rush which causes everything to be more, more stressful than it needs to be. But actually it is about having a shared project that everyone's working on together, and that you are trying to achieve the best outcome. And I think, that is related to good design, that the effort to achieve good design is required to create something that is going to have longevity and be used and enjoyed for a long period of time. And that, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
thanks,
short,
Tom.
sorry, Sarah.
That's good.
It's short and snappy.
Thanks for mentioning the sort of agility of design to change. And I think, that also applies to the agility of the construction method or the materials. I know it's something I angst over a lot. We do a lot of concrete slabs because it really makes sense thermally in our cool climate in Canberra. But then I often think about when we're renovating suspended timber floors, just how easy they are to access and change everything, which you really don't have with the concrete. So, as architects, we're always balancing a whole heap of different considerations that we put into play. But that's one that really fascinates me as well. And how do we design for these changes that we can't even imagine yet? So it's a really interesting one. And thanks to the person who asked that question. I think it was a really interesting one. So we've got sort of 20 minutes left. Those watching, feel free to pop any more questions in. And I know there's one about job seeking we might touch on at the end. I did ask each of the guests to bring their own question. Perhaps you've thought about that. And we might just see if one or two other people want to answer them. So we haven't prepared this. No one knows what anyone has asked. I might start with Matt. What was your question?
Thank you for asking me, Sarah. Yeah, look, I mean, we're all emerging architects, as the award says. And so I guess my question is, as emerging architects, what do you think are the unique values or approaches that a young architect can bring to the profession, whether it's just job specific or to a practice?
Who wants to add to that one? I think Tom would have a good answer to that one.
I can have a go. I think every generation has sort of set of preoccupations and ideas that they engage with very sincerely. And I think young architects or emerging architects are engaging with some very important ideas with a lot of passion. And you see that all around Australia, and you see that reflected in the quality of work by emerging architects in awards programs, which then and younger people also who are involved in policy making, that there's a real passion to make the world a better place through architecture. And I hope that is, is something that we all have in common as a sort of set of shared values. And you also, through teaching, you see what's important to students and the younger generation and how they see sort of modes of collaboration and a sort of fluidity around the way they work will influence architecture in interesting ways, I think, in the future and in necessary ways. And I think we also bring a kind of an openness to things that are changing, whether that's around cultural identity, social norms, these and ideas about how we build and engage with the public are all sort of, we have an openness to try new things, and I think that's very exciting and that's very appropriate to a whole bunch of projects. And then on the other hand, clearly through a lot of events such as what Imagine and the Institute puts on, is there's very experienced senior practitioners in the profession have an enormous amount of wisdom and perspective, which is also really important for particular projects. And I think the balance of the two is a very healthy thing within the industry in Australia.
That's a brilliant answer, Tom. I think you took the words out of my mouth on the point about collaboration and fluidity. I think that's a really strong thing coming through in future generations. We might get another question. Pippa, would you like to ask your question?
Sorry, just unmuting. My question is, what do you do to create space for creative thinking?
That's a good one. Who wants to? Yeah, Erin?
For me, I spend more time with my kids. And I know that sounds a bit silly, but the creativity that comes from their minds, because they're so uninhibited, they don't understand, or that they haven't been programmed to understand rules and specific ways of thinking yet. So I think if I want to feel more creative and then become more creative and do everything else, I make sure that I'm fully present with them and just actually engage with them in whatever way I can at that particular point in time. And that lets me, it just opens so many doors that had been shut through my life, and new ways of thinking. So I think that's one thing. And then making sure that you pursue things that might be of interest to you, not just things that definitely are. So if there's something that's sort of on the edge of the realm of architecture in any way, shape or form, and you just find it even a little bit interesting, it's worthwhile pursuing that even for a little while, just to see where it takes you, because I think there's so many ways that we can be creative that are everything is related to architecture in some way, shape or form, but they just give you that little different perspective and that slightly different opportunity to find something else and to spark that piece of joy in you that helps that creativity.
That's a really beautiful answer, Erin. And I think I'd add, sort of in the same note as looking at children, but creating space for boredom. There's actually a lot of research about how our lack of boredom these days, because you can always reach for a phone or something, is killing creativity, because it's your mind doesn't have that sort of time to tick over things subconsciously. So often it is actually just about creating space by creating boredom, I think. That's an awesome question, Pippa. Ellen, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. I've got two here. I reckon one of them was a little bit related to what Erin said, but I think the other one, like advice for the younger you. We're all emerging architects, and I feel like we've all still got so much to learn, but we've probably learned a little bit now. Any advice for the younger you?
Any takers? Pippa?
I think my biggest advice would be just be honest with what you don't know. And I think that's the biggest door to open to create space for collaboration. So if you're on site and you don't know why something's being done in a certain way, just ask. Or if the client's asking for a really peculiar thing, like, I don't know, both asking the question and showing curiosity in everything you do is the best way to kind of broaden your understanding. There's nothing worse than acting like you know the answer and then being proven wrong very awkwardly. So, but it's also a massive missed opportunity to learn in a really meaningful way that I think you won't forget, because you've kind of recognized you don't know something and made it an opportunity.
Thanks, Pippa. And Tom, did you want to add to that one?
Really?
Sorry, Ellen.
There you go, Ellen.
I was going to say the other way you learn something really hard is pretending that you do know it, getting it completely wrong, and turning it up on site, and then you'll never do that again.
I feel like there's a story behind that one for another day. Tom, did you want to tack on to that question?
We look at this in, I teach professional practice at Monash, and we ask this question of the students and or have these discussions. And one way that we ask the students to look at it is to think about what they're interested in and what they're passionate about, and try to find or reach out to practices that they feel they might have an affinity with. And because all practices will have different preoccupations and focuses, and I think if you get in a practice where you do have those shared values, then there's a really good chance that you'll become a good part of the team and feel very comfortable asking questions in with an open and collaborative way. So I think that's important, not to just, I mean, can be hard to get a job, but if you do have a choice sort of to gravitate towards the practice where you feel that there's more alignment with what your interests are.
Yeah. And did you have a question of your own, Tom?
No, I think the people that have asked questions have been really good. So I was actually interested to hear how other people found time for creativity. And I think that's a really good one. So maybe we could go back to that one.
Yeah, we can swing back. I'll keep that in mind if we have a bit of time at the end, which we probably will. Erin, did you have a question?
Yeah, mine is actually kind of the reverse of Ellen's question. It's specifically for the other emerging architects here, is what would you say to yourself 20 years from now? And there's a lot of sort of I'm not going to say research because I don't think it's scientifically backed, but there's an approach now that sort of says, talk to yourself as if 20 years has gone past. What would you tell yourself at that point in time about where you are and what you've achieved and where you're headed? So I'm really interested to hear what everyone has to say about that.
Wow. Matt, you're going in for the mute button there?
Yeah, I'm just holding the mute button down. That's a really tough question. Super tough. It's very easy to think, 20 years ago, what would you say? But, into the future, it is a big challenge. I mean, if anything, I'd probably just tell myself in 20 years I'll just give myself a kick in the bum and just keep going, keep following what you want to do. Maybe it's the same forward or back, what you tell yourself.
These are the kind of questions I end up losing sleep over. Like, they haunt you for years. Thanks, Erin. I think sorry, you go, Matt.
I was just going to say, I was going to maybe jump back to an earlier point, but Pepper talking about asking questions on site and remaining open, and kind of maybe this is a bit of a long thread, but Ellen's first point about sustainability and going into a new place and asking the right questions. And I think that through your whole career, I think it's all about just knowing when or what questions to ask, or that you should and can ask questions, and that's the way that you engage with the kind of matter at hand, as well as the team and collaboration. And I think that when I went to sit the registration exam, the teacher basically told me, if you don't know the answer, as an architect, you almost never always know the answer, but you have to learn to ask the right questions to navigate your way through to the answer. When you do the first sketch on a paper, you have no idea how it's going to be built, but you're just sort of throwing an idea into the world, and then with the team, you're going to kind of step forward day by day and kind of navigate the way to the project. And each day there are new questions and challenges and things found on site, or changes in a client brief. And it's just about knowing how to navigate that path in a way that kind of is sort of joyful and diplomatic and holds and pulls the team together. And the more fun that process is, the more everyone loves to be part of it. But yeah, sorry, Erin, that isn't an answer to your question, but it's more just maybe a bit of advice for young architects.
I think on a similar thread, maybe I'd have a shot at saying, reminding myself to keep thinking about the big picture and the big objectives and what I'm doing and why I'm doing it and what do I want to do next. It's so easy, I think, the busier we get, just to focus on the spinning wheel, getting the project done. And it's good to have a reminder to take a step back and look at what you're doing. I'm assuming, Erin, if you ask the question, maybe you've been thinking about an answer. What would your answer be?
Like you, Sarah, this is one of the sort of questions that I lose a bit of sleep over. So I don't have an answer. I think for me, it's, as you sort of said, it's about taking a step back. And I think that's where this question is particularly powerful, especially as you're sort of perhaps either starting out or sort of hitting mid-career, where you do get bogged down in the day-to-day, the chore of everything, just trying to make ends meet and make projects work and home life and everything else. So it's good to sort of have that question and ask yourself that regularly, so that you can take that step back and sort of see where you want to head overall. Because I highly doubt that in 20 years' time I would say to myself, yes, you did really well getting that particular project out at that particular deadline by working on it for 20 hours straight. Like, in 20 years' time, I'm not going to care about that. So I think it's good for that sort of pause and reflect moment.
Thanks, Erin. That was a really powerful question. I'll text you in the middle of the night when I'm thinking about it. I wanted to jump to a question that's come in. I think we probably have some good short answers from a few people. How would you explain the importance of architecture to a younger generation of clients? And Lauren's particularly commented on younger generations seeing architects as an expense not needed, but I would actually argue that that's a sentiment you can find across all generations. Pippa?
Yeah, I think this comes up a lot and it's really interesting. How to sell that though, I'm not quite sure. I guess it's the the investment that people are putting into the built environment, and just if you're going to be investing that much money into a building, why not just spend a little bit of that as a percentage on some design thinking before you get out of the ground, and think about what the actual kind of goal of the building will be. I don't feel like I'm answering that very well, but people like in Tasmania at the moment, there's a massive increase in property prices, and everybody's more than happy to spend that percentage on the real estate agent at the end, but they're not, then sort of question it when you ask for that percentage at the start of architecture fees and things like that. So it's that level of thinking about what you're doing and where you're spending your money, and just having an expert advise you on that, on designing that, really, because it's the design that really has the impact on the experience of a building.
Yeah. There's a brilliant book that I always talk about, Why Architects Matter by Flora Samuels. And I'd say any young architects that are asking themselves this question should get their hands on a copy of that book, because Flora applies a lot of research actually into how architects talk about and present the value that they offer, as well as sort of tips and techniques that we should use, and it's a really valuable read. I'm really excited she's going to come in and be a guest soon in the architecture project, if I can do a shameless plug for my membership. Did anyone have anything to add on that one?
I was just going to say, I was totally thinking about the real estate agent analogy there. I think that's such a good point. I've got to say, if you're talking to someone and you're trying to convince them in 2 minutes of the value of architecture, it'll have to be a financial argument. You'll never be able to convince them that the benefits of design in a time frame like that. There's an architect in America who, rather than charging his clients a fee up front, he just tells them every time the property is sold, I'll take 2% or 5%, I've never tested it with a client, but it's a great way to do it, because every time now his houses are sold, he's getting a commission.
Matt, I'm
so
totally going to put you on the spot. I've heard this urban myth for a decade about this person.
Really?
No one's ever been able to tell me who it is. Are you willing to say which architect it is?
I don't know their name. Everyone just tells me this guy.
I heard it was an Australian architect. A prominent Australian architect has a clause that he gets a percentage of the increase in profit if a house is ever sold.
I feel like that's a flawed principle, though, because it goes against really understanding your client and really, like, not that it has to be, like, I completely agree with Tom about allowing for spaces and flexibility, but yeah, you want to be designing a space they really love, so that
they're not going to sell
it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it might take a while for the paycheck to come in. I've got one final question that I think we should all touch on before we wrap up. Regarding project workflow, what is the best way of developing a project with today's technology that doesn't hinder the creative process? Many students can be tempted to skip sketching and model making altogether. Tom, do you want to take that one?
I've got a very short answer. I draw everything. So I make, and that goes back to someone else asked the question about Ellen, about how do you find time for creativity. I think it's part of my role as an architect is to design and draw, and so I deliberately set that time aside, because that's an integral part of the design process, and that can be quite challenging when there's a lot going on in a project and a lot of consultants and things like that, but I think it's really important. So just drawing, it's as simple as that, I think.
Drawing, it's as simple as that. I think that's the sentence to end our discussion on. It's been really exciting to have all of you join me tonight in the same room, and I know it would be really exciting for those that have been watching live and from running these in the past. I know that they're going to continue to get airtime from students and graduates, many students and graduates coming up in the future. Hopefully everyone can come back in a year's time. I want to do it again with this year's winners. It's an exciting format, and thank you all for so generously communicating so well, I guess, what you do and the thoughts you have about architecture and the industry, and sharing your very valuable time with us tonight. So thank you, each of you, Matthias Hollenstein, Pippa Jensen, Tom Mckenzie, Aaron Crowden, Ellen Buttrose, and we had Sandy Angie with us. Thanks for joining us. See you all.